This is Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on Ground Zero and across the globe.
Another Ambazonian has been appointed Prime Minister of French La République du Cameroon. I am innocent here.
To gain recognition, Ambazonia must demonstrate that it offers more economic, geostrategic and financial gain to the countries recognizing it than La République du Cameroon. This is Manjang Ambe.
The world has very little appetite for new countries, and the plight of those who seek to establish a new country, even in order to escape genocidal violence, as in the case of Ambazonia, often face indifference by other countries. This is Anne Barignoy for Ambazonia Calling.
It is only after the Congress of the United States threw its political weight behind independence for Timor-Leste that the United Nations found the political will to deploy a multinational peacekeeping force. This is Tanya Esime.
The War of Independence led to a vote for independence. Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia in 1993. This is Delano Nukon.
It is the blind crackdown of forces loyal to an autocrat, Slobodan Milosevic, that won the sympathy of the world for Kosovo's independence. This is the monk from Ibalikumato.
Let us unmask the raging genocidal state terrorism in Ambazonia unleashed by the Satanic Republic of Cameroon. Kata Mentan for Ambazonia Calling.
As laudable as self-defense is, exercising it gave the BIA regime the license it always wanted to slaughter any Ambazonian and claim they were a combatant. This is Divine Angie for Ambazonia Calling.
It is exactly 1 year and 1 day since Seseko Ayuktabe and 9 of his closest aides were abducted in Nigeria, held incommunicado, then renditioned to Cameroon.
Free our leaders! Naira 10! Free our leaders! Naira 10! Free our leaders! British people! Free our leaders! The British government! Free our leaders! United Nations! Free our leaders! United Nations! Free our leaders! African Union! Free our leaders! African Union! Free our leaders! Commonwealth! Free our leaders! Free our leaders!
On the occasion of the first anniversary yesterday, Saturday, dozens of demonstrations were held across the globe, calling for their release and the release of all other Ambazonian abductees.
So, hello everybody, this is Dr. Ngasa Amanyangwe, Manunga Studio. I'm reporting from Stuttgart. I'm here in Stuttgart with our brothers and sisters from Ambazonia, Southern Cameroons. We are here to commemorate the first anniversary of the arrest, of the kidnapping, of the illegal deportation of our leaders from Nigeria to the Republic of Cameroon, where they were kept incommunicado for almost 9 months. So, let me leave you people now to follow the developments here in Stuttgart. Okay, let's wish ourselves a very nice day. Nigeria, so wahala. ABC, ABC, wonderful. ABC, ABC, wonderful. Mommy tell me say no go Nigeria, wonderful. We go Nigeria, they kidnap our leaders, wonderful. We go Nigeria, they kidnap our leaders, wonderful. Kidnap our leaders, then they go to the Republic, wonderful. Kidnap our leaders, then they go to the Republic, wonderful. ABC, ABC, wonderful. ABC, ABC, wonderful. Mommy tell me say no go Nigeria, wonderful. Mommy tell me say no go Nigeria, wonderful. We go Nigeria, so wahala, wonderful. We go Nigeria.
1 year ago, the terror regime snatched from us patriots of ours, warriors of ours. Before then, they took BBC Mancho. They took Ngalim Felix. They took Penn Terrence. They took the Benjis. They took the Nelson. They took the Tatingus. They locked them up, 250, 2,000 in Kondeng in their jails. What was their crime? They stood up for the land of their birth, to be free in the face of the world, to breathe the same air in the same breath, to dream, to have hope, to think about their loved ones, work for them, support them. 1 year ago, remember, a man who stepped on the platform of the struggle, unknown to us, but a wonderful personality, despite the rancor and the politics of the struggle, was snatched from his family, from us, from the Amazonian people, locked in the dungeons of the occupier, taken to a kangaroo court, sitting under the oppressor's flag. If you've never been angry, I want you to listen to Thomas Sankara. To get meaningful change, you require some degree of madness.
Rallies calling for the release of Siseko Ayub Tabe and all other Ambazonian detainees held in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, and in the Americas. We will hear more as we turn now to Bobe Innocent with our news wrap-up for the week.
Another Ambazonian has been appointed Prime Minister of French La République du Cameroun. News of the appointment of Joseph Diongute, 65-year-old former lecturer of law at the University of Yaoundé, broke less than 24 hours after unidentified arsonists burned down his retirement palace in Bongongo 1 around Lobe and Ekondo Titi in NDIAN State, Ambazonia's southern zone.
Thank you all very much. You of my quarters, you have come, you have shown your support and solidarity, and we thank President Paul Biya for this honor that he has conferred on us. Thank you very much. Yes.
Joseph Diongute and Cameroon famously lost to Dr. Kevin Gomne, a ally of the Southern Cameroon's People Organization, SCAPO, in a 2000 decision by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in Banjul that ascertained Ambazonians as a people, separate and apart from those of La République du Cameroun and with an inalienable right to the self-determination that they now seek. Dr. Joseph Diongute will be filling the shoes of another house slave, Philemon Yang, who has been the longest-serving premier in the history of La République du Cameroun, 2009 through 2019.
Nous avoir rendu cet honneur.
Merci beaucoup. C'est notre Premier ministre.
Et je suis là avec vous. Merci.
On the one-year anniversary of the abduction of 10 leaders of the Ambazonian Restoration Quest, including Siseko Ayub Tabe, president of the self-styled interim government group, scores of Ambazonians rallied at a plaza in front of the U.S. Congress building in Washington, D.C. The rally, 2 days after the swearing in of the 116th U.S. Congress, was led, among others, by the wives of the abducted leaders, notably Lilian Ayub Tabe, the wife of Siseko Ayub Tabe.
As we have gathered together as women who gave birth to those children that are being killed, we agree and we decree and it will be established in heaven. We say every plan of the enemies to wipe us out, we wipe them out in the name of Jesus.
As well as Dr. Samuel Sako, acting instead of Ayub Tabe.
You are Excellency. Thank you for standing behind our leader, His Excellency Siseko Ayub Tabe Jr. And thank you for standing behind the other excellencies that are in jail. and they have been put in jail by some unexcellencies.
Messages across the board call for a unilateral action from U.S. President Trump to ensure the release of the leaders.
We will never ever leave our journey halfway. Until we reach Boya.
Observers noted that in a memo reportedly addressed to President Trump, no reference was made of Siseko Ayuktabe as president. He was referred to as a leader of the struggle.
Not turning back again. Move on, don't be frightened. The Savior understands. Not turning back. Move on, don't be frightened. The Savior understands. Not turning back again. Move on, don't be frightened. The Savior understands. Not turning back.
Still on the subject of abducted and detained Ambazonians, 37 more Ambazonians have reportedly been transferred from their holding dungeons of Sed in Yaoundé to the Nkondangi Central Prison. Generally referred to as the Taraba 37, like the Nera 10, they were abducted long before Siseko Ayuktabe and co were abducted and extradited to Cameroon from Nigeria. A major American network, The Voice of America, has started reporting on the state of crisis between La République du Cameroun and Ambazonia. On Thursday, January 3rd, VOA focused on Kumbo, Northern Zone, reporting about Ambazonians deserting towns and villages even as President Paul Biya of colonial Cameroon committed to more genocide in his 2018 end-of-year speech unless the self-defense groups lay down their arms. Finally, pictures went viral midweek of Cameroon's military setting another fire to a primary school in Ambazonia. Cameroon's professional arson force burned down one of 3 primary schools in Widikum as they continue their scorched earth policy. I am Innocent Chia, Ambazonia Calling.
Still ahead in this edition, we have The Devil Unmasked with Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. We have a winner of the Nyamfaka of the Week. And we are not done until you have heard our letter to Joshua. So stay tuned, kick back, relax, and enjoy Ambazonia Calling. Ambazonia Calling can now confirm that at least 2,000 foreign mercenary forces are going to be deployed in Ambazonia, in addition to the Chadian troops that were already spotted on arrival in Yaoundé en route to Ambazonia. According to our reports, these troops will include French troops. So we call on our people, please look out. The days ahead will be rough, but we are built for this moment. This is what we've been waiting for. The moment when we must claim independence, freedom, dignity, and total independence from an annexationist regime. This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people. Sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in Boya.
Joseph would have never taken the throne without his brothers throwing him into a pit. David would have never become king without Goliath. Jesus would have never risen from the dead and brought us salvation without Judas betraying him. Quit worrying about who's not for you. Some enemies are designed as a part of your destiny. They're not going to stop you, they're going to promote you. Now, keep running your race, not looking to the left nor to the right. not bothered by who's not celebrating you, who's not cheering you on. Other people may not be able to see your gifts. They don't know what God's put in you. They can't feel what you're feeling. Don't let their discouragement talk you out of it. Don't let the fear of what they think hold you back.
This edition of Ambazonia Calling brings you a special series, one that you can only hear on Ambazonia Calling. It focuses on recognition. We have picked as examples countries that bear some similarities with Ambazonia, whether it comes to self-determination or it comes to the quest for recognition at international level. We will begin straight away with Somaliland. As you know, Somaliland is perfectly independent, but it is still not recognized. But there was a moment when it was before it joined Somalia. Here is Anne Berinye on her first assignment on Ambazonia Calling.
What is wrong with Somaliland is wrong with Ambazonia. Organizations like the UN and the AU insist that Somaliland is part of a one and indivisible Somalia, ruled from Mogadishu. Unlike Ambazonia, which is not yet fully independent, Somaliland is. Its claim to existence is based on an attempt to re-establish colonial borders. One British journalist, Graham Wood, once described Somaliland as existing in the limbo world, an expression he would most likely use to describe Ambazonia. One thing is clear. Both Somaliland and Ambazonia are self-proclaimed. To become real countries, they need recognition by other countries, which happens when other countries are willing to accredit ambassadors to yours, to accept your passport as valid travel document, and to welcome your delegation into the membership of organizations like the African Union, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The legality of being a country with internationally recognized borders, the case of Ambazonia, fulfills the conditions of being known as a country when citizens and leaders of the said country complete the purely political process of winning recognition from peers. Therein lies one of the greatest difficulties for any new country. The world has very little appetite for new countries, and the plight of those who seek to establish a new country, even in order to escape genocidal violence, as in the case of Ambazonia, often face indifference by other countries. Britain ruled Somaliland as it did Ambazonia through the system known as indirect rule, relying on local chiefs and clans, while Italy administered Somalia as an integral part of Italy's so-called but short-lived North African empire that included present-day Libya, parts of Egypt, and some claim to Ethiopia. In the past, Somaliland was an independent country, fully recognized by international community, including the UN. The period of recognition lasted less than a week, though. On 26 June 1960, when this former British Somaliland became independent, recognized by 35 countries around the world, including the United States. The next day, its legislature passed a law approving a union with Somalia. On 1 July 1960, Somalia gained independence from Italy, and the two were joined together. It is a decision Somaliland has regretted ever since and seeks to reverse. This is Anne Berinye for Ambazonia Calling.
This thing will go on for 50 and 100 years. You cannot kill everybody. And even if you kill everybody, the stones would avenge for the blood that spills on them. The soil will get up and start fighting.
You have plenty of show yet to come, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The people of West Cameroon cannot be your slaves. The people of West Cameroon are not, you did not conquer them in war. The problem we have in West Cameroon is the problem that will bring down Cameroon. When people have had pent-up anger and pain, humiliation, for over 50 years, when it bursts out, you will never be able to control it.
They will sooner realize that the people of Ambazonia will not surrender. They will sooner realize that you can arrest and kill, but the more you arrest and kill, the more you energize the people's spirit.
One of the things territories that seek recognition do, at least at the level of the United States, is to try to get on a list maintained by the U.S. State Department. That list is called the Dependencies and Areas of Special Sovereignty List. It is maintained by the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the Department of State. The territories that are currently on that list include, American territories like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, the American Samoa, but they also include territories like Guadeloupe, which is under the French, the Falkland Islands under the British, and the one African territory that is on that list is Western Sahara. It is one of the lists on which Ambazonia needs to get on. We need to get our act together, get to work together, and focus on the diplomacy that it takes to get us to recognition. Now to case number 2 in our series on recognition. Kosovo. Here is the monk from Ibali Kumato.
In 2008, Kosovo became Europe's newest country.
For all those who might be tempted to think that Ambazonia would be too small a country in size and population, Kosovo is much smaller.
Serbs considered and say that Kosovo is their Jerusalem. It was the sort of heart of Serbia.
Its population is barely above 2 million inhabitants. It is less than the surface area of Ambazonia.
Throughout the 1980s, Kosovo enjoyed autonomy within Serbia, but the majority ethnic Albanian population wanted more political freedom.
One thing for which the world finally decided Kosovo had to gain independence was the violence, sectarian violence in the case of Kosovo.
It was a conflict that pitted an authoritarian nationalist leader, Slobodan Milosevic, against Western military power.
As with Kosovo being the worst sectarian crisis in Europe at the time of independence, Ambazonia has officially been named Africa's worst mass displacement crisis, the worst crisis in the Gulf of Guinea since the Biafra War.
General Ojukwu left behind about 2 million starving Igbos, many of them young children who'd suffered the horrifying effects of malnutrition during 2.5 years of war. Over 2 million civilians died in the war from starvation alone.
It is the blind crackdown of forces loyal to an autocrat, Slobodan Milosevic, that won the sympathy of the world for Kosovo's independence.
Kosovo Albanian nationalism was growing. There were demands that Kosovo become a republic. Kosovo Serbs began to complain, saying that they were threatened.
The same blind crackdown by tyrant Bia is having the same effect on Ambazonia. The US took a deep interest in the case of Kosovo, initially calling for mediation as they are doing in the case of Ambazonia. But in the end, then US President Bill Clinton found it impossible to decry ethnic cleansing and genocide.
We must not allow ethnic cleansing or genocide, particularly at the edge of Europe.
Much of the history of Kosovo resembles that of Ambazonia. Kosovo became part of Serbia from 1912, 4 years before Southern Cameroon was mapped out as an internationally recognized territory.
Kosovo was part of Serbia from 1912. Then, in 1918, Serbia became part of what would become Yugoslavia.
As with Southern Cameroon enjoying a brief period of some level of autonomy under a federation, Kosovo enjoyed a considerable level of autonomy under Serbia.
This is the southern city of Pristina, capital of Kosovo province.
But from the 1980s, Slobodan Milosevic scrapped the autonomy as the Ahidjo and Bia regimes suppressed autonomy for West Cameroon, leading to mass disgruntlement and agitation for independence, which culminated in 2008 in international sovereignty for Kosovo.
This small state of 1.8 million people emerged as a result of one of Europe's most brutal sectarian conflicts since the Second World War.
It is a path that we at Ambazonia Calling believe Ambazonia is following, albeit rather slowly. This is the monk from Ibalikumato, Vajrakov himself for Ambazonia Calling.
We must go and use every forum that we have to remind the world that the people of Ambazonia are being massacred and slaughtered on a daily basis, and the time has come for the world to rise, and that the world must now begin to speak about the question of Ambazonia and their right to self-determination.
There are two Cameroons that came together. If you are telling us that what happened in Cameroon is like dropping a few cubes of sugar into a basin of water, who is the sugar and who is the water?
Doubting Thomases who think that this is a battle which will be concluded through military action will discover to their shock and chagrin at once that it will not happen.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
There are some striking similarities between the situation of Ambazonia and Taiwan, especially when it comes to recognition and it comes down to the politics of diplomacy, which involve economic, geopolitical, and the financial interests of countries recognizing any given country. Here is Barrister Manjong Jutambe with our analysis on Taiwan.
Recognition for Taiwan has failed to happen, or at some point seemed to have been achieved, only to be scrapped later because other countries tempted to recognize Taiwan have so much to gain from relations with China that they simply refuse recognizing Taiwan. In some cases, when they had already recognized, they unrecognize, if there is such a word. To gain recognition, Ambazonia must demonstrate that it offers more economic, geostrategic and financial gain to the countries recognizing it than La République du Cameroon. The concessions offered to ExxonMobil and the New Age gas deal are part of La République du Cameroon raising the economic stakes for the United States and Britain, respectively. It is worth noting that these are also two major world powers that chose China over Taiwan. Frustrating as this may be, Ambazonians must come to the realization that the diplomacy and/or politics of recognition calls on us to play smart, a feat that has eluded us so far. We've made no offers to any countries. We do not have a legitimate authority that could be seen as a credible party and representative to make any such offers on our behalf. Winning recognition from a few countries, or even many countries, won't be a guarantee that such recognition will be maintained. Taiwan, once a member of the United Nations, lost its seat in this prestigious club in 1971, when the world body opted to recognize China instead. Chinese authorities till date regard Taiwan as a breakaway province that must accept reunification with communist mainland China. In 1979, the United States switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing, despite Taiwan being a lucrative market for United States military-industrial complex and other US-made goods and services. Only a little over 20 small and mostly poor countries the world over recognize Taiwan today, compared to over 170 that recognize China. Though not impossible, it is a very tough and steep climb to conceptualize countries buried deep in the hypocrisy of diplomacy giving up their interest with China in favor of Taiwan. Also, recognition for the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic by several countries has been reversed. It is through this lens that Ambazonians must look at the task of recognition that they seek. It is about time we fold our sleeves and get to work, with the goal of ensuring that our homeland does not find itself in the same position as Taiwan. This is Manjong Jutambe for Ambazonia Calling.
We will return with more examples on recognition as part of our series after our interview segment.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Welcome, Professor Tata Menta, to The Devil Unmasked.
Thanks for your welcome, Ntumfoyn, and let us unmask the raging genocidal state terrorism in Ambazonia unleashed by the Satanic Republic of Cameroon.
What do you want our listeners to understand by the expression state terrorism?
Yes, Ntumfoyn, simply stated, as the one currently taking place in Ambazonia, is generally understood to mean the systematic and intentional targeting of civilians meant to create a climate of fear in a population to bring about a specific political objective. It is this targeting innocent civilians that stands out in efforts to distinguish state terrorism from other forms of state violence.
There must be historical antecedents to state terrorism.
To shoot straight, Ntumfoyn, I will say yes, there is, of course. The French government's reign of terror that brought us the concept of state terrorism in the first place. Shortly after the overthrow of the French monarchy, a revolutionary dictatorship was established, and with it the decision to root out anyone who might oppose or undermine the revolution. As you know, tens of thousands of civilians were killed by guillotine for a variety of crimes. You can therefore see immediately the historical roots of state terrorism inherited by Francophone African statelets from Mother France.
What would the motivation be for state terrorism in a place like the Cameroons?
In the context of the Satanic Republic of Cameroon, Ntumfoyn, fear is a paramount feature of social action. As you know, it is characterized by an inability of Lucifer Paul Biya and his gangster regime to predict the consequences of their behavior because public authority is arbitrarily and brutally exercised. You can see why former Prime Minister Simon Achidiachu spent a huge slice of his time restoring collapsed state authority in that enclave in the early 1990s.
Now, this is such an evil but persistent way of governance in a place like the Cameroons that citizens may not even know that state terrorism is being visited upon them.
Ntumfoyn, that is the point. It is easy to explain. State terrorism is concealed. For example, the use on official repression executed by vigilante domestic terrorist groups. For instance, you remember in the early 1990s, Mandafis Chapelle Obiri was the archdeacon of such domestic terrorism. In recent memory, you have the likes of Ekema Patrick Esunge of the certificate fraud fame in Boya and celebrated embezzler Dumunji in Bamenda. These individual groups receive support from agents of the terrorist state like gendarmes and police. That is why it is difficult for people to point accusing figures at the state directly, but tend to blame the individuals.
And there are huge stakes for regimes that are unpopular, that are undemocratic, like the ones of Mr. Biya, on pursuing such genocidal violence.
Well, Ntumfoyn, the goal is to enhance the authority and legitimacy of a crumbling regime by targeting its perceived enemies. The Satanic Republic has enormous resources, as you know, at their disposal. For example, borrowing weapons from China, Russia, France, Serbia, even 20 Typhoon jets from the United Kingdom of all countries, or using American drones and trainers to suppress or terrorize Ambazonians.
Let me return to this question which we mentioned and discussed when we talked about rape as a weapon of war last week. Does state terrorism amount to a war crime?
Ntumfoyn, I will simply tell you they do, and the list is long, especially serious ones in violation of international humanitarian law or grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. For example, willful killing, torture or inhuman treatment, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body, extensive destruction or appropriation, of property, willfully depriving Ambazonians of prisoners of war fair trial, and unlawful deportation, abduction, or transfer of leaders like Siseko Ayuktabi and KUPE from Nigeria, as you very well know. Unlawful confinement incommunicado in dungeons like they said in Yaoundé, and taking of Ambazonians as hostages from the northern and southern zones to a foreign country like La République du Cameroon.
Holy smoke, that list reads like it was written for Cameroon. I mean, it confirms at least one thing. Mr. Biya is a war criminal. Now, can you tell me, does the rest of the regime patronize state terrorism?
Ntumfoyn, it does. State patrons like DOs and governors or other officials typically rationalize policies of state terrorism by arguing that they are necessary to 1. Suppress a clear and present domestic threat to so-called national security. 2. Maintain law and order during times of national crisis. 3. Protect fundamental cultural values that are threatened by subversives. And finally, restore stability to governmental institutions that have been shaken, usurped, or damaged by enemies like the Ambazonians.
Now, Prof, how does the Biya regime seek assistance in domestic policy in support of state terrorism?
State assistance to the regime of Lucifer Paul Biya typically rationalize policies of genocidal repression by adopting official positions which you can find from the lips of people like Issa Chiroma, Colonel Didier Bajek, governors, DOs, and mediated choir singers of state terrorism. In this case, they say blame Ambazonians' adversaries for the breakdown of law and order and call on the people to assist the government in restoring order or disarming the Ambazonian fighters. Argue that the genocidal violence is evidence of popular patriotic sentiments to suppress a threat to national security. Call on Ambazonian restoration forces to lay down their arms and at the same time blame the violence because of the fighters who are supported by the diaspora. Assure everyone that the government is doing everything in its power to restore law and order and offer humanitarian assistance of bread and sardine, but that the regime is unable to immediately end the violence and offer that bread and sardine because of support by the diaspora given to the restoration forces.
We discussed a moment ago domestic support and patronage to state terrorism. Does the state of the Cameroons also enjoy foreign sponsorship of state terrorism?
For the state, as you understand, does have foreign patronage. You can have so many examples like the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Commonwealth Secretary General and African Commission Chairperson, who directly assist the terrorist state either by looking the other way or using delaying tactics to avoid action and continuous support even when the criminal state has become known to commit atrocious crimes against humanity. When these crimes are revealed, these patrons typically reply to this information with rationalizations. In fact, the patron does one of 4 things. Accept state terrorism as a necessary tactic to fight provocation from minority groups, as the United Nations Secretary General said in the case of Ambazonia to the visiting delegation led by Professor Gogomo to the United Nations. Deny that what occurred should be labeled as terrorism. Even deny, as France does, that an incident occurred in the first place. Finally, issue a blanket and moralistic condemnation of all such violations as unfortunate and hypocritically call for inclusive dialogue.
What would you say to states and international organizations that patronize Mr. Biya's state terrorism?
Ntumfoyn, I will simply say that let them look out and isolate the terrorist state of La République du Cameroon that brutalizes unarmed people and squanders their natural resources for the personal gain of a corruptocracy. Displays no regard for international law, threatens their neighbors, and callously violates international treaties to which they are signatories, is determined to acquire and use weapons of mass destruction, and rejects basic human values and hate everything for which world peace represents.
Let's draw to a close here, Prof, with what's your message to Ambazonians this week?
My word for our cherished people of Ambazonia and Ntumfoyn comes from the book of James chapter 4 verse 7. It enjoins Ambazonians to resist the devil of the terrorist Satanic Republic of Cameroon, and we will flee from them. The key word here is resist.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Tatamenta, for joining us on Devil on Mask. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you, Ntumfoyn.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people. Sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in BOYO.
We return to our series on recognition, and just a quick programming note here to mention to you that we have coverage on the end of year speeches for the leaders coming up at the end of this series. But to our series, one of the things that has been said repeatedly is that when countries decide to go to war to get the independence, that it does eventually work. Here is Delano Mukong.
Although no one would like to admit it, it would seem that some countries gain recognition after the international community reaches the conclusion that their independence war is unwinnable by either side, and the differences between the two sides too deep-rooted for reconciliation under one flag to be possible. South Sudan and Eritrea probably fall into that category. In both cases, independence and recognition, granted in the hope of ending the bloodshed, was followed by more years of war.
Well, today's a proud day at the state capitol, lawmakers recognizing the country of Eritrea as they celebrate its Independence Day.
Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia in 1993, but was locked in a devastating war with the neighbor 5 years later. Over 70,000 people were killed in that second war linked to a border dispute.
They fought a devastating war. The peace deal they signed in 2000 was not honored.
Recognition is possible at the level of states in the United States. Sometimes it happens faster with states or slower. In the case of Eritrea, for example, California did not recognize Eritrea until last year, 27 years after independence.
Eritreans from Northern California came to celebrate there at the Capitol. This is the first time their independence is being recognized by the state. The Eritreans gained their independence after a decades-long civil war with Ethiopia.
A former Italian colony, 1889 to 1941, Eritrea was ruled by Britain from 1941 to 1952, when it was granted autonomous status within Ethiopia. In 1962, in fashion exactly similar to what the Republic of Cameroon did to Ambazonia a year earlier, Ethiopia annexed Eritrea.
The story of Eritrean victory over Ethiopia is one that many are proud of. Rebels battled a far more powerful army for 3 decades until 1991.
The War of Independence led to a vote for independence held in 1993. This is Delano Mukong for Ambazonia Calling.
Stay tuned. Ambazonia Calling will be right back with more news, analysis, commentary, opinion, and editorials.
The closing example to our series is just taking a look at what happened to Timor-Leste, or East Timor. And here with an analysis of what went down is Tanya Eseme on her first assignment on Ambazonia Calling.
Our last example is Timor-Leste, or East Timor.
It's the last major East Timor road yet to be abandoned by the armed gangs.
In the last year, before they voted in a referendum to gain independence from Indonesia, the nature of the violence, the arming of government-hired militia, the levels of violence were escalating the same way these are in Ambazonia right now.
Across the former Portuguese colony, 50,000 people are simply too terrified to go home. But the vote they expect to change everything is just days away. They can't go home, neither can they ignore the excitement. In a town where whispering you're an independent supporter is a dangerous act, they're yelling it.
This is an historical event for us, that they will feel freely and they will talk anything.
The BOYO regime could be said to be copying from the playbook of the government of Indonesia, which was the colonial power of East Timor.
Their fight now is largely with other East Timorese.
In the months before independence, the Indonesian military armed, deployed, encouraged, and blamed pro-independence campaigners for violence by pro-government militias like the Atanga G Boys in Ambazonia.
Across East Timor's political divide, there are tens of thousands of men with weapons. Civilian militias, the muscle of the autonomy campaign to keep East Timor as part of Indonesia. They're accused of murdering scores of independence supporters and terrorizing most of the territory.
The BOYO regime, as of early December 2018, had hired and armed 4,000 militia in Ambazonia. Indonesia had tens of thousands of their militia deployed across East Timor. The Indonesian government-hired militia in Timor-Leste, as well as the one of the Cameroonian regime in Ambazonia, also applied scorched earth tactics, razing entire villages.
Along the way, village after village utterly destroyed. An activist for East Timorese self-determination, Andrew McNaughton has no doubt who shoulders the blame for the destruction here.
That coordination can't have come from anywhere but from an army, from the Indonesian army, and it can't have occurred without being endorsed and sanctioned from the top level of the Indonesian Armed Forces. This cannot be a lower level operation.
The burning to the ground of entire villages left over 50,000 people across East Timor sheltering in the bushes and forests.
It's East Timor's largest concentration of refugees,
being 10 times fewer people than are sheltering in the bushes and forests across Ambazonia.
Refugees are relying on the church to shield them from the militia's campaign of terror.
In the same way as the international community has abandoned Ambazonians as they are being slaughtered today, world bodies which could have prevented the situation did the same thing in Timor-Leste, which is they did nothing.
Typical of the East Timorese, this group is happy UN-sanctioned forces made it at all. Not even a hint of anger that the world left them at the beginning of last month to the mercy of a spiteful, brutal, and unusually destructive military operation.
It is only after the Congress of the United States threw its political weight behind independence for Timor-Leste that the United Nations found the political will to deploy a multinational peacekeeping force.
The first large foreign contingent to reach Suai seems more intimidated by the few locals who've dared to come home than the locals are of this new army in town.
Troops mostly from neighboring New Zealand and Australia, led the contingent of UN peacekeepers that finally made the independence vote possible.
Australian troops will follow in a campaign to end 5 weeks of terror in East Timor's last militia stronghold.
Even as the hour is dark for Ambazonians and the mass slaughter of thousands is numbing, Ambazonians should remember that it is through such an hour of darkness that Timor-Leste had to pass just before gaining international sovereignty.
Independencia! Independencia!
This is Tanya Esime for Ambazonia Calling.
We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Nyamfuka of the Week.
Veronique Vitimfe has got our lineup of kings and queens of foolish for this week.
Finishing in third position this week are the daytime political ashawos of colonial Cameroon, who continue to deceive slave master Paul Biya that by choosing them over other slaves, that by retaining them in his cabinet, somehow colonial Cameroon will wiggle out of the war it has waged against Ambazonians. The political acquirers include those shown the door through public firings, such as young Philemon, those called to the table of crumbs, such as Dion Ngute. They include the liar-in-chief, made carpenter apprentice in the role of vocational education minister, Issa Chiroma. They include Barrister Jean de Dieu Momo, who vociferously defended Ambazonian prisoners abducted and held in dungeons of La République as hostages for the sole purpose of selling himself on television to the evil regime of Paul Biya. The political acquirers, both outgoing and incoming on the Biya cabinet, are this week's third place finishers for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the Week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Finishing in the position of runners-up are the dividers-in-chief, who claim to own Ambazonia and the revolution. Without winning an election themselves, they require all others to win an election to serve on their so-called local governments or county governments, ruling with the same instrument as the colonizers, meaning ruling by decree. They expel all other political movements from the umbrella structure, ahead of the Fourth Conclave, also known as the Zaria Mafia. Now, they have banned other restoration forces on ground zero. Just imagine the extent of abuse that these fellows would inflict on Ambazonians once they control an army or a police force. For seeking to privatize Ambazonia, the same way the colonizers have privatized colonial Cameroon. For ruling with the same decrees and bans of organizations they do not like. The power mongers of Ambazonia, who all know themselves are this week's runners-up of the award of shame, the Nyamfuka of the Week.
Nyamfuka them all.
The winner of the crown this week has been under consideration for the last 2 weeks while we conducted independent investigations. This week, based in part on partial admissions and the sounding of alarm bells that some of his own are committing war crimes in Monyenge and may end up at The Hague. Those crimes include torture, abductions, hostage-taking for ransom, extortion, and extrajudicial executions. This week, one of the acts that could harm our revolution included granting an interview to a lady, most likely an agent of French Secret Service masquerading as a journalist, in which the leader of the APLM and the Commander-in-Chief of SOCADEF, Dr. Ebenezer Akwanga, did the right thing by blaming France for the genocide in Ambazonia. He, however, did the wrong thing by throwing other Ambazonian comrades under the bus for the crimes which he himself confesses, for evidence that they have been involved with hostage-taking for ransom. Dr. Ebenezer Akwanga is this week's winner of the Crown of Shame, the Nyamfuka of the Week.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is Veronique Fetimfe for Ambazonia Calling.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is the first week of the new year, and the end-of-year addresses by leaders must be still very fresh in your mind. In what must be qualified as his best speech since assuming the leadership of the interim government group, Comrade Sako Ekome made a series of promises to Ambazonians.
We will never become a South Sudan or Eritrea post-independence. I will seek to offer a more inclusive political leadership in the diaspora and a coordinated command structure on ground zero. On the security arena, we are already in the process of reinstituting our mobile wing police force. This is the main security institution that we inherited from our forefathers before colonial president Amadou Ahidjo came to override it with his barbaric colonial gendarmerie.
Comrade Sako had some pretty harsh, even threatening words towards those he considers should be banned, have already been banned, or need to be shamed into changing their attitude in this revolution.
Even in the middle of a brutal war, we will not tolerate war criminals of any sort throughout our national territory. Atanganji's militias and Bia's terrorist forces masquerading as unidentified gunmen and criminal elements parading as amber boys should take special notice. I must also use this opportunity to caution other well-intentioned Southern Cameroonian Ambazonians, social media activists, and surrogates, whose excesses and failure to apply wisdom, discretion, and sound judgment are doing more harm to our campaign than good. To shame and exclude all sellouts, we want to reprimand those compatriots who have blatantly chosen to disregard the will, desires, and aspirations of all.
Comrade Sako stressed that this revolution belongs to all Ambazonians.
This is the people's revolution. Let us convert every negative energy into a thoughtful process.
Yet, he could not help but indicate that there was a race here to power.
We are in a revolution where everyone is looking up to whoever provides a working solution. Let me use this opportunity to address some strange Southern Cameroonians, especially on ground zero, who are nurturing and propagating a separation of ground zero from the diaspora for flimsy reasons. We cannot fight for power before we fight to take control.
While carefully navigating around the fact that members of the IG group were not elected, apparently do not need to be elected, Comrade Sako insisted on the need for representatives to all the jamborees organized by the IG group, on the need for these representatives to be elected.
It is therefore illegal for anyone to officially present any group of people at this time as a parliament of Ambazonia. The process of electing local government administrators must be transparently democratic and involve people who are wholly committed to the restoration of our sovereignty. This is why we must be careful who we elect or nominate to represent our communities.
He paid tribute to all Ambazonian heroes who have made the ultimate sacrifice, pointing to those still held in prison, including Siseko Ayuktabe and his team, as those who should provide inspiration for all Ambazonians on the journey of no return.
They are our inspiration as we continue this journey of no return to BOYO.
On the lawsuit that has been brought before a court in California, attacking the Ambazonian revolution and trying to paint it as a terrorist movement, Comrade Sako suggested it was no more than comic relief.
I have gone through the court case against us. It is laughable indeed. My brothers and I are not afraid to appear in any court for this cause.
In putting forward the number of at least 30,000 fighters enrolled as Ambazonian restoration forces, Comrade Sako said the time had come to move from defensive to offensive, indicating that so far restoration forces had just been warming up.
We will shift the game plan from a defensive strategy to an offensive strategy. Ambazonia will be hotter for the occupier in 2019, with about 30,000 Amba warriors ready to defend themselves and our communities from the big evil. We are only warming up now, just getting started. I declare 2019 the year of dynamic reclamation of our national territory and our place in the community of nations.
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news shrine. Call us the Kalakuta Republic of commentary, opinion, and editorials.
Comrade Chuayaba had some heartwarming words of congratulations for what every Ambazonian had done in 2018.
With 10 guns, we shattered the myth around the invincibility of the brutal occupier. Fellow Ambazonians, you did in 2 years what more powerful people, more powerful systems have not been able to do for hundreds of years.
He thanked governments around the world.
The House of Lords spoke for you. The Bundestag spoke for you. The US Senate spoke for you.
Urging those of them who had already done something to do more.
But I call on Her Majesty's government to do more for the refugees, for those displaced, for the women suffering in the bushes. I call on the Nigerian people to support our case for independence. I call on the Nigerian people to know that our pain must be their pain. Our suffering must be their suffering.
He called on citizens of La République du Cameroun
Vous êtes un pays digne.
to rise up against the dictatorial regime of Mr. Biya and overthrow it.
Rise up, Cameroonians, and overthrow the system.
And ensure that the people of Ambazonia get justice.
Rise up, Cameroonians must realize that injustice in Ambazonia is a threat to justice in Cameroon.
Comrade Chuayaba reminded Ambazonians of the evils they were fleeing from the Cameroons and stressed the need for them to ensure that they do not replicate the same evil in the country they are struggling to build.
2019 should be a year of hope, should be a year of less division. We must collaborate. You cannot dominate anyone. We have lived under domination from Cameroon for 57 years, under a system of hierarchy, of master and servant. Leaders must walk on a pedestal of equality, mutual respect, tolerance, coexistence, support for one another. That is the only way we can speed up the day we set our captives free. Build a better country for ourselves and the next generation. Be quick to those yet unborn and those still striving for a brighter future, something more enduring.
Comrade Chuayaba, leader of the AGC and the ADF, and one of the most vilified by the interim government group, stressed the need for a government to be formed with consent from the people.
The burning desire to be free is innate to every mankind, whether crippled, whether fast runners, whether those walking slow. the desire to be free in the land of your birth, to make your laws, decide those who govern you, is inherent in our existence. Let the world know, as the first democratic country in Africa, we still hold true today as we held yesterday, that the consent of our people shall be the basis of the formation of any government, the formulation of any policy. That's why we fight for the little things, to be able to go to school where we are taught to become assets to ourselves and not liabilities, to ply the highway from the Mongo to Boya in 30 minutes without being followed by police officers who are corrupt, without paying toll gates to occupiers, to be able to fly air amber and take pride in your own heritage, to be able to live in Victoria and walk in Bamenda, build your own seaport where you create opportunities for your own people.
For Comrade Choayaba, the essence is for everyone to become a soldier of the revolution and to focus on liberation.
My fellow Ambazonians, I'm a soldier of the revolution. We are all soldiers of our liberation. Let us focus on liberation. There will be the time of governance. And during that time, we must still respect one another. I have hope in Ambazonia. I have hope not because it is easy, but because we are powerful. Collectively as a people, as I have said before, we will fight together, go to jail together, smile and cry together, hope together, mourn together, because after all, we are Ambazonians together. God bless you all. I know the new year is not happy. In any case, Happy New Year.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Because you have your army of occupation out in West Cameroon, you believe that when the people will rise, even if you took the whole of the French army and added to yours, you will never bring them down.
And I call on all Cameroon soldiers to lay down their arms within Ambazonia and to turn their arms against the very system that has made them slaves in the land of their birth.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, compassfreepress.com, and africafreedomnetwork.com.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, my people have asked me to heartily congratulate you on getting slaves like Sugar Daddy Philomene Yang and the newest recruit to that last supper of sardine and bread, Dion Gute, to kill each other for positions. This week's round of musical chairs saw the boy man from Ekondo Titi outfox Sugar Daddy Yang. I mean, all those years for nothing. It is the game of slave eats slave. The musical chairs are just about moving seats around on a Titanic in the forlorn hope that doing so would prevent the Republic of Crayfish and Janga from running aground. You lie, Joshua. As Prince Supreme and Master Juggler of this kingdom of darkness, you, Joshua, got at least one thing right. You did not hide the real nature of Chop People the Money. You gave that Chop People the Money the right emblem of fire. And it can be said that your party of flames has not disappointed its reputation. Your regime has left nothing untouched, nothing unburned. Schools, businesses, homes, estates, farm states, human beings, entire villages have all tasted of the unholy flames that Chop People the Money visits on them. To guarantee that the man you picked this time around as head boy, you ensured that he would unreservedly worship at the altar of the creator of Jacques Famendongo. You spared no liter of fuel to burn down his abbot in Ekondo Titi. The heavy security guard at the residence conveniently vamoosed to give free ride to the arsonists when they did not simply supply the funge with which the damn thing was done. Even in its sorry state of charred remains, anyone can tell it was a splendid palace erected on the blood of the downtrodden Ambazonian of Ekondo, funded from ill-gotten wealth And another reminder, that the Republic of Bread and Sardine celebrates only those who make it their job to loot the people's treasury. As with the election of a pope, when white smoke signals that a successor has been found to St. Peter, the smoke from Okondo Titi signaled the finding of the new slave, Habemus Njongute Primus Servus, the Latin for first slave. Never mind those idiots who thought organizing the touching of their homes in upcountry was going to lead them to be picked. I mean, definitely I'm not referring to Paul of Mbambalangogomo, whose abode on the Ndok Plains became a sacrifice rejected, like the one offered by Cain, the brother of Abel, in the Bible. It did not help that they even got an assist by burning down the neighboring village of Banguren in next-door Bamun Kingdom. The verdict is out. The creator of Jacques Famundongo has accepted the sacrifice of Abel, the Diongute, rejecting by extension the half-hearted sacrifice of the burned-down property in Belo of the in-laws of Sugar Daddy Yang, as well as the sacrifice on the Ndok Plains, of course, of Cain, Paul, Gogomo. Very clearly, the chief slave, Abel Diongute, offered more, a lot more. He had no trouble letting go, after all. Easy come, easy go. How do you complain when what you stole from the people is stolen from you by fire? Seriously, Abel Diongute invested massively in the regime of flames. Who has forgotten his report along with Paul Gogomo back from that mission at the United Nations, in which they indicated and confirmed to you, Joshua, that the taker of the golden bribe had agreed to use his good offices, or is it his evil offices, to cover up for the crimes of colonial Cameroon in Ambazonia. Now, that is the kind of gift that lights a fire of love in the heart of the devil. When you have Antonio of Portugal accepting to be hired as the chief firefighter from New York on behalf of the Prince of Angola. To celebrate, the party of flames burns down. It is the only way to show oneself a true worshipper of the party of flames. This is how come fire gutted the home of the Constitutional Council chief just days before he was due to ensure that everything else from everyone else was irreservable. Exactly what happened to the other member of the Constitutional Council, Paul Pasrod Nkwi, whose home was burned down in his native Wombong in the northern zone. As with Abel John Gute, the former SDF member just has to worry about how to rebuild that home in Wombong. In passing, and in order to make sure that Professor Maurice Kamto will never find the election tally sheets, that's also why the Party of Flames was able to burn down the annex building at the Palais de Congrès, where all the tally sheets from the Constitutional Council about the presidential elections were held. But now, thanks to Antonio of Portugal and Golden Bribe Taker, who is in New York, your regime no longer has to run around to put out fires. Everyone else has taken trophies. The African Union, the Commonwealth, everyone has accepted they would burn in hell if they don't defend you, Joshua. This is probably why you decided you no longer need the firefighter in the person of Lailai Chiruma Bakari at the Department of Propaganda and Lies. Now there are no more fires to be put out. If there are any fires, they'll be taken care of by the high-ups. In the meantime, Issa Chiruma Bakari can go to vocational education and join terrorists of Boko Haram in converting into a trade that will probably help him. Maybe become a Ghana co-op, for instance. And hopefully, some people can enroll with him, like Atangananji, Franklin Jume, and, Momo, John of God. Joshua, he who fights or destroys with fire, he who lives by fire must surely die by fire. It is only a matter of time before your regime burns in the fire of the revolution that Kamto is calling for. You have been listening to Ambazonia Calling. We came to you from our studios here in Washington, D.C. Our producers today: Jeff McCoy, Logistics, Joe Costa, and Krista Cunningham. Our music is from Ken Wanaku, the monk from Balikumato Vazukov himself, from William Ford, an Amber music star of blessed memory, from Eric Matisse on the web at soundimage.org, and from Prince BOYO of Ajam, Sonicatron, USA. Ambazonia Calling is a joint production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. You can find us on the web at missionstribune.com, at compassfreepress.com, and at africafreedomnetwork.com. Next Sunday is another date. Until then, keep the spirit, keep the faith, keep up the good fight for justice and independence for Ambazonia. Stay Amber strong.